My name is Nora Whitmore. I am 65 years old, a retired librarian who once believed that books and quiet devotion could shield me from the storms of life. Yet here I am, standing in the middle of a run-down barn on the night of my birthday, clutching a rusty key in trembling hands. The wind whistled through the broken boards, carrying the echo of my daughter's words, her cold voice ringing like a verdict. "You're nothing but an old burden." She had taken the villa in Napa Valley, the sun-drenched vineyards, the place where I had once raised her among the roses and laughter. I was thrown out of the house I thought was mine, cast aside by the very child I had given everything to, and so I chose this barn for shelter, the last thing my husband left to me. What I found inside that night left me utterly stunned. I had never expected to end up here, wrapped in the shadows of splintered wood and forgotten dust, while my daughter celebrated her triumph in marble halls and glass chandeliers. The barn was supposed to be worthless, a cruel joke disguised as an inheritance, yet something about it called to me. As I slid the key into the old lock, the metal groaned as though waking from decades of silence. The heavy doors shuddered before creaking open, revealing a darkness so dense it swallowed the moonlight whole. I hesitated on the threshold, heart pounding, afraid of what waited in the silence. But the choice had already been made for me. This was all I had left. Inside, the smell of hay and rust wrapped around me like a shroud. Dust motes floated in the pale beam of my flashlight, landing on broken beams, cracked floorboards, and rusted farm tools abandoned to time. I thought of my husband Richard, of the smile that once lit his eyes, and how he had promised me, "Nora, you'll always be safe." Safe. What kind of safety could be found in this ruin? And yet, even in despair, I felt a pull, as if some secret lay hidden just beyond sight, waiting for me to claim it. The sting of betrayal burned deeper than the chill of the night. Claudia's face haunted me, the smug tilt of her chin, the glint of victory in her eyes as she accepted the keys to the villa, the way she dismissed me in front of the lawyer without a flicker of remorse. She had everything I thought would be mine: the vineyards, the house, the memories carved into every stone. What she left me was a carcass of wood, but I told myself that if this was all I had, I would not crumble. Even in exile, a woman must stand. As I stepped further into the barn, the silence grew heavier. My flashlight flickered across the walls, catching on something sharp. For a moment, I thought it was just the reflection of a broken shard of glass. But then I saw it clearly. A glint of metal gleaming from the corner, clean and deliberate, out of place in a room drowning in decay. My breath caught in my throat. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Richard. Could this be his doing? My heart ached at the thought. He had always been a man of riddles and quiet foresight, a man who saw further than I ever could. Perhaps even in death, he was still speaking to me. I pressed a hand against my chest, steadying my breath. The barn was no longer just a shelter. It was something else, something layered with meaning, and I could not turn back now. That night, in the darkness of that forgotten place, I felt my story shift. For the first time in years, I wasn't just a widow discarded by her own blood. I was a woman on the edge of discovery, pulled into a path Richard had quietly carved for me. And so, with the weight of betrayal pressing down on me and the faint spark of something unknown stirring within, I whispered into the night, "Richard, what have you left me?" The only answer was the whisper of the wind through the cracks in the wood. Still, I knew this was only the beginning. Before I take you deeper into what happened next, allow me to pause for a moment. If you've ever been told you were too old, too weak, or too much of a burden, you will understand the fire that carried me forward. If my story resonates with you, stay with me until the end, and if you feel moved, share it with others. Your support helps me continue to tell these untold stories, stories that remind us it's never too late to reclaim dignity and discover unexpected strength. That night in the barn, on the very day I turned 65, my life as I had known it ended, and in the shadows of betrayal, something entirely new began. My name is Nora Whitmore, 65 years old, a retired librarian who once believed that my life would settle into quiet evenings of books and tea after my husband passed. Instead, I found myself sitting stiffly in a room that smelled faintly of oak polish and old money, waiting for the reading of his will. My hands clenched the hem of my skirt, as though holding on could anchor me to something solid. The lawyer, Mr. Grant, shuffled through a stack of papers, his glasses catching the light, while my daughter Claudia leaned back in her chair, eyes sharp with anticipation. She looked every inch the victor even before a word was spoken. I had clung to the hope that Richard, in all his wisdom, would leave us both something fair, that he would not divide his legacy in a way that would tear us apart. Yet the truth was sharper than any blade. The villa in Napa Valley, the house I had nurtured into a home, the vineyards where Richard and I had once walked hand in hand, that villa was handed to Claudia. My daughter's lips curled into a satisfied smile as the words fell from Mr. Grant's mouth. For me, there was nothing of marble, glass, or sunlight. What Richard left me was a barn, a run-down barn on the outskirts of the estate. Claudia's laughter cut through the stillness like glass shattering on stone. "Of course," she sneered, turning toward me. "The villa belongs to me now. You can have your barn, Mother. It suits you." Heart faltered. Every syllable carried contempt, each word pressing me deeper into exile. I wanted to defend myself, to remind her that without my sacrifices, she would not have had the education, the life, the foundation she stood on. But the weight of her scorn left me voiceless. Mr. Grant cleared his throat, his tone clipped and final. "These are the instructions as left by Mr. Richard Whitmore. His decision is binding." He looked neither at me nor at Claudia, his eyes locked firmly on the page, as if detachment could shield him from the pain his words inflicted. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if Richard had done this to protect me, to teach Claudia a lesson, or if it was simply his way of ensuring peace. But peace was nowhere to be found in that room. Claudia leaned forward, her voice a venomous whisper meant to wound. "You know, Mother, I've always despised how weak you are. Always clinging to Father, hiding behind his shadow, pretending your silence was grace. He saw it too. That's why you're left with nothing but splinters and dust." Her words struck harder than any physical blow. She was not just celebrating her gain, she was reveling in my humiliation. I tried to lift my chin to keep my dignity intact, but my body betrayed me, trembling under the cruelty of my only child. The barn. Was this truly all Richard thought I was worth? A hollow structure falling into ruin, a place where forgotten tools rusted in the dark? Or was it something else, something more that Claudia could not see? Still, humiliation wrapped around me like a cold chain. Claudia stood, smoothing her designer dress, already embodying the mistress of the villa. "Don't think you can linger here, Mother. This is my home now. You'll need to leave today. Take your barn and whatever scraps you find in it. I have no room for you here." Her dismissal was absolute, as though the blood that tied us had been severed forever. I looked at her, searching for even a flicker of the child I once cradled, the little girl who had clutched my hand on her first day of school, trembling with fear. But all I found was arrogance, hardened by greed. Tears burned the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of her. Mr. Grant folded the will neatly, his expression unreadable, and slipped it back into its folder. "That concludes the reading," he said. The formality of his voice grated against the storm brewing inside me. He stood as though to signal the end of an unpleasant duty, offering nothing more. He was simply the messenger, and I could not blame him for carrying out the orders left behind. Claudia gathered her handbag and keys with a careless air. She didn't even look at me again. To her, I had become invisible, erased in the very house where I had poured my life into raising her. She had claimed victory, and I was cast out with only a barn to my name. When the room emptied and I was left alone with silence, I pressed my hands against the polished table to steady myself. "Richard, my love, why? Why would you place me here, humiliated and discarded, while she, our daughter, drove me into exile?" The barn key felt heavy in my pocket, as though it carried more than just rust and age. I rose on unsteady legs, my heart pounding with both grief and defiance. Claudia might have thrown me aside, but I would not surrender to despair. Perhaps Richard had hidden something in that barn, something Claudia's arrogance blinded her to. Perhaps he trusted me more than I realized. The thought was the only ember of hope I had left, and I clung to it with all my strength. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, you know the hollow ache that settles deep within the chest. That night, as I left the villa for the last time, I carried that ache with me. And if my story strikes a chord with you, I invite you to stay and walk with me through the path that unfolded. Your presence gives me courage to keep telling what happened. And if you feel moved, share this journey so others might find strength in it too. I closed the door behind me, leaving the villa to Claudia's hollow triumph. In my pocket, the barn key pressed into my palm. It was time to face what Richard had left me. My name is Nora Whitmore. I am 65 years old, once a librarian who spent her days surrounded by shelves of forgotten stories. Now, my own story had become one of betrayal and exile. My daughter Claudia inherited the villa in Napa Valley, with its manicured vineyards and grand halls, while I was left with a rundown barn. She called me an old burden, her words sharper than any blade, and she threw me out as if I were nothing. So here I was, standing in front of the barn on the outskirts of the estate, clutching the rusty key my husband Richard had left me, and wondering if this broken place was truly all I had left. The heavy doors groaned as I pushed them open, the sound echoing into the cold night. My flashlight beam cut through the dust and shadows, falling across warped planks and forgotten farm tools. The air smelled of mold and damp hay, as though the barn had been holding its breath for years, waiting for someone to step inside. For a moment, I felt foolish. Claudia had been right. What was this but a shelter for rats and cobwebs? But as I took another step, my light caught something peculiar. Amid the ruin, there was a faint, metallic glimmer, deliberate and clean, as though untouched by decay. I froze. Richard's face flickered through my memory, his knowing smile, the way he had always spoken in half-truths, as if guiding me towards something without ever saying it aloud. Could he have hidden something here? My breath grew shallow. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and moved closer, heart pounding. The glint came from a panel of wood near the far wall. Unlike the others, it was smoother, less weathered, as though replaced or concealed on purpose. I brushed my hand over it, dust coating my fingers. Then with a small push, the panel shifted. Behind it was a small compartment. Inside lay an envelope with my name written in Richard's unmistakable hand. My knees weakened, and I sank to the floor, staring at the familiar curves of his penmanship. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and ink, and in that moment I felt as though he were there with me, guiding me as he always had. My fingers trembled as I held the envelope to my chest, afraid to open it and yet desperate to hear his voice once more through the words he had left behind. I pressed my back against the cold wooden wall, tears stinging my eyes. Claudia had taken the villa, the life I thought would be mine, but Richard had placed this in my hands. A barn, yes, but clearly something more. My grief and anger swirled with something new, curiosity, maybe even a fragile spark of hope. What could he have hidden here that he didn't want Claudia to find? I leaned my head back, closing my eyes for a moment. "Richard," I whispered into the silence, "what have you done?" The barn creaked in reply, the sound of old beams settling as though carrying secrets within their bones. The weight of the envelope pressed into my palm, solid and undeniable. Before I take you deeper into what Richard revealed, I want to thank you for staying with me. These memories are not easy to relive, but sharing them gives them meaning. If you've ever felt abandoned or overlooked, perhaps my story will remind you that hidden strength sometimes comes from the places we least expect. If you feel touched by this journey, stay with me until the end, and if it moves you, share it with others, because none of us should ever face exile alone. I tucked the envelope into my coat, feeling as though it burned with secrets too heavy for the night air. Then, sweeping my flashlight across the barn once more, I noticed something else. At the far end, half hidden beneath straw and rusted tools, was a structure that didn't belong. Metallic lines, faint but deliberate, suggesting more than just storage. My heart quickened. Richard had left me a map not to vineyards or villas, but to something concealed in shadows, something meant only for me. In that instant, the barn no longer felt like ruin. It felt like a doorway. My name is Nora Whitmore. I am 65 years old, once a librarian who thought the rest of her life would be spent quietly among books, gardens, and the comforting weight of memories. Instead, my daughter, Claudia, inherited the villa in Napa Valley, called me an old burden, and cast me out. She took the vineyards, the marble halls, the home I had poured my life into, and left me with nothing but a barn. Yet when I stepped into that barn, I found an envelope with my name written in Richard's hand, my late husband who seemed to reach out to me even from beyond the grave. That night, I sat on the cold floorboards, holding his words close to my chest, knowing my life was about to change. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. The paper crackled like a living thing, fragile yet full of weight. Richard's handwriting, bold and steady, leapt from the page. "My dearest Nora," it began, and just the sight of those words unraveled me. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the letters, and I pressed my hand to my lips, holding back a sob. For so long I had carried the silence of widowhood, the emptiness of being left behind. Now here was his voice, steady and warm, as if he were sitting beside me in the shadows of that barn. He wrote of love first. He always did. "I know you doubt yourself," he said, "but you are stronger than anyone sees. Stronger than even Claudia can understand. That is why I could not leave you with the villa. She would have consumed you there, drained you until nothing remained." My breath caught as I read, each sentence slicing through the confusion I had carried since the will was read. Richard had not abandoned me. He had chosen differently. The letter revealed more than I ever expected. He admitted he knew Claudia's heart had hardened over the years. He saw the ambition in her eyes, the disdain she could not hide. "I left her the villa, Nora, because she must be tested. She believes the house is a prize, but it is only a weight. She will either drown in it, or she will learn. As for you, my love, you hold the key to what truly matters." I wiped my tears, staring at the envelope in disbelief. Richard had seen it all coming. He had known Claudia would betray me, push me aside, and yet he had also known that leaving me with the barn would not be a punishment, but a protection. "Inside this place lies what I could not trust to anyone else," he wrote. "It is yours, Nora, and yours alone. You will know what to do when the time comes." I folded the letter back into the envelope, holding it as if it were a heartbeat in my hands. For the first time since Claudia's cruel dismissal, I felt something bloom inside me, an ember of purpose, faint but unyielding. Richard had trusted me. He had seen strength in me, where even I had seen only frailty. As I sat there in the dim light of the barn, I could almost hear his voice, the calm cadence he used when we sat on the porch together in the evenings. "Nora," he would say, "life doesn't always reward the kind, but kindness is its own inheritance." Now, with the barn creaking around me and the cold seeping into my bones, I understood what he meant. He had not given me stone and glass. He had given me a riddle, a challenge, and a legacy that could not be measured in vineyards. Before I share more of what Richard entrusted to me, let me pause and speak directly to you. If you've ever been cast aside, made to feel small or unwanted, then you understand the ache I carried that night. But you also know that sometimes, hidden beneath rejection, there is a path to something greater. If my story resonates with you, I hope you'll stay with me until the end. And if you feel moved, share it with others so that no one facing betrayal has to feel completely alone. I tucked the letter back into its envelope and placed it close to my heart. Richard had left me more than words. He had left me courage, a reason to step forward into the unknown. I rose slowly, brushing dust from my skirt, and looked around the barn with new eyes. It was no longer just decay and splinters. It was a place built on secrets, on faith, and on the quiet strength he believed I still carried. In that moment, I knew I could not give up. Claudia might have taken the villa, but Richard had given me something far greater: trust, and the chance to reclaim my life on my own terms. The barn was not an ending. It was a beginning. And so I whispered into the silence, "I will find it, Richard. Whatever it is you left, I will honor it." My name is Nora Whitmore. I am 65 years old, a retired librarian who once believed her life would fade quietly into evenings of tea and solitude. Instead, I was cast out of the villa in Napa Valley by my own daughter, who called me an old burden and left me with nothing but a run-down barn. She took the house with its marble halls and sprawling vineyards, while I held only a rusty key and the sting of her betrayal. Yet inside that barn, I discovered an envelope from my late husband, Richard, telling me there was more to this inheritance than Claudia could ever imagine. That night, I followed his words, and what I found left me breathless. The letter had guided me to search deeper, urging me to trust my instincts. So I did. With my flashlight trembling in my hand, I returned to the corner of the barn where the glint of metal had first caught my eye. Clearing away broken boards and matted hay, I uncovered a small iron handle embedded in the floor. My heart thundered in my chest. This was no ordinary barn. Kneeling down, I pulled with all my strength, and the wooden trapdoor creaked open, releasing a breath of air colder than the night itself. The beam of my flashlight cut into the darkness below, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling into the ground. My palms grew damp, my throat tight, but Richard's words echoed in my mind. "You will know what to do when the time comes." So I placed one foot on the first step, then another, descending slowly, the old wood groaning beneath me. The deeper I went, the thicker the air became, carrying a strange mixture of oil, leather, and faint traces of cedar, the scent Richard had always favored. At the bottom, I stepped into a chamber that took my breath away. It was vast, carved into stone, lit by a row of small bulbs strung neatly along the ceiling. The walls were lined with covered shapes, large and looming, their outlines betraying the truth. I reached out and pulled one of the heavy tarps away, and the dust rose in a golden cloud under the light. There before me stood a gleaming car, its polished chrome untouched by time. My knees buckled. It was one of Richard's prized vintage automobiles, a piece of history worth millions, hidden here where no one but I could find it. I turned slowly, pulling away another tarp, then another. Each revealed another treasure. A collection of vintage cars, immaculate and priceless, each a testament to Richard's secret life of preservation and foresight. My eyes blurred with tears. He had left Claudia the villa, yes, but here he had left me the real legacy, tucked away in silence, safe from greed. In the center of the room stood a steel safe, tall and unyielding. On its surface, taped carefully, was a second envelope with my name. My hands shook as I lifted it. Richard's handwriting greeted me once more. "My love," it read, "if you are here, you have already found what Claudia could not. These cars, these papers, the funds I set aside, they are yours. Use them to live freely and to protect yourself from what may come. Do not let Claudia's hunger consume you. You were always the heart of this family. Now you are its protector." I pressed the letter to my lips, whispering, "Oh, Richard." The years of loneliness seemed to melt away in that single moment, replaced by the warmth of his trust. He had hidden all of this for me, not as wealth to flaunt, but as security, as proof that I was not forgotten, not abandoned. Before I tell you more of what I uncovered, let me pause to thank you for staying with me through this journey. These discoveries were not just about material things. They were about finding strength in places I thought were broken. If you've ever been underestimated or cast aside, I hope my story reminds you to look closer. Sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden where no one else dares to search. Stay with me until the end, and if my story speaks to you, share it, so others might find hope too. I tucked the letter into my coat, then turned back to the safe. My hands brushed the cold metal, feeling the lock beneath my fingertips. Beside it lay a small box with a key inside, as though Richard had anticipated my hesitation. I slid it into the lock, and with a heavy click, the door swung open. Inside were stacks of documents, bank ledgers, investment portfolios, property deeds. My vision blurred as I realized the magnitude. Richard had built an entire fortune beyond the villa, a fortune he had hidden away, waiting for the day I would need it most. I sank into a chair nearby, overwhelmed. The barn that Claudia mocked as worthless was, in truth, a vault of immeasurable value, designed not just to preserve wealth, but to preserve me. And in that underground chamber, surrounded by Richard's careful foresight, I felt a shift. I was no longer the discarded mother, no longer the silent widow. I was a woman entrusted with a legacy greater than I had ever imagined. My name is Nora Whitmore. I am 65 years old, a retired librarian who once believed her days would be filled with books, gardens, and the comfort of family. Instead, my daughter Claudia inherited the villa in Napa Valley and looked me in the eye as she called me an old burden, leaving me only a run-down barn. What she thought was worthless became the place where I found Richard's hidden letter, a secret staircase, and a treasure that proved his love had never abandoned me. But discoveries like these can be heavy to carry alone, and that was when Eleanor Hayes stepped into my life at just the right moment. Eleanor lived a mile down the winding road, a woman a few years older than me with silver hair pulled neatly into a bun and a gaze that carried decades of wisdom. She had been a friend of Richard's long before I ever knew him, a neighbor who seemed to appear at the edges of our lives, steady and reliable. I hadn't spoken with her in months, not since Richard's funeral, but one morning, as I swept the dust from the barn's threshold, I saw her figure approaching. She leaned on a walking stick, her coat buttoned against the autumn chill, and her presence filled the air with a quiet strength. "I heard you've moved into the barn," she said gently, her voice more understanding than pitying. Claudia made sure everyone knew. The sting of shame rose in my chest, but Eleanor's eyes softened. "Don't you worry, Nora. Richard prepared more for you than she realizes." My breath caught. How could she know? We sat together on an old wooden bench by the barn, the morning sun painting the fields gold. Eleanor reached into her pocket and pulled out a small brass key, its surface worn smooth. She pressed it into my palm. "Richard gave me this years ago," she whispered. He told me to hold on to it until the day you needed it." I stared at the key, the metal warm from her touch, and tears stung my eyes. Richard had thought of everything, down to the moment when I would need a friend to place hope directly into my hand. Eleanor leaned closer, her voice low and steady. "He worried about Claudia. Worried she would challenge you, drag you into court, try to strip you of what he wanted you to have. He trusted me to help you, Nora." And I will her words wrapped around me like a shawl, easing the ache I had carried since the will was read. In Eleanor, I saw not just a neighbor, but an ally, someone who understood the burden of betrayal and the quiet strength it took to rise above it. Before I tell you what happened next, let me pause for a moment. If you've ever felt the sting of being underestimated, or if someone you love has turned against you, you know how heavy that silence can be. But allies can come when you least expect them. If my story speaks to you, stay with me, and if you feel moved, share it with someone who may need to be reminded that they are not alone. Your support helps me continue walking this path of truth and healing. Eleanor walked with me into the barn, her steps slow but deliberate. Together we descended the hidden staircase I had discovered, the light bulbs flickering to life above us. When she saw the rows of covered cars, her lips curved into a knowing smile. "I told him once this place looked like nothing but rot," she said softly. But Richard only smiled and said, "That's the beauty of it. No one will look where they think there's nothing worth taking." She touched the hood of one of the vintage cars with reverence, as if greeting an old friend. She guided me toward a second trapdoor at the far end of the chamber, one I hadn't noticed before. The brass key slid into its lock as though it had been waiting for decades. With a heavy click, the door opened to reveal a smaller room beyond. Inside were cabinets filled with legal documents, receipts, and meticulously kept journals. Eleanor's eyes met mine. "This is what he wanted you to have. Proof. Records that will stand against any challenge Claudia tries to bring." I ran my fingers over the leather-bound journals, each page a record of Richard's foresight. Bank accounts, trusts, investments, all secured under my name, hidden from Claudia's reach. My chest swelled with both gratitude and grief. He had done all this quietly, building walls of protection around me while I remained unaware. And Eleanor, steady Eleanor, had carried the key all these years, waiting for the moment to deliver it into my hands. When we returned to the sunlight, I clasped her hand, unable to contain the emotion rising in me. "Eleanor, why would you do this for me?" She smiled faintly, her eyes shining with memories of her own. "Because, my dear, Richard saved me once too. He believed in people when they had lost belief in themselves. This is my way of passing that gift forward." As she walked back down the lane, her figure small against the wide horizon, I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time since Claudia had turned her back on me, I no longer felt alone. I had an ally. I had proof. And most of all, I had a purpose that stretched beyond exile. My name is Nora Whitmore. I am 65 years old, a retired librarian whose life took a cruel turn when my daughter Claudia inherited the villa in Napa Valley and left me with nothing but a run-down barn. She called me an old burden, a phrase that cut deeper than any knife, and threw me out of the home where I had raised her. What she didn't know was that inside that barn I had uncovered Richard's hidden letters, a staircase, and treasures that spoke of his love and foresight. I was still learning what they meant when Claudia herself appeared at the barn's doors, her presence like a storm I had no choice but to face. It was late afternoon when her sleek black car crunched over the gravel path. I froze, my hands still dusty from lifting boxes in the hidden chamber below. The barn doors stood ajar, and I rushed to close them, but Claudia's sharp voice cut through the air before I could move. "So this is where you're hiding, Mother." Her heels clicked on the ground as she approached, her perfume too sharp for the rustic air, her eyes gleaming with disdain. She stepped inside, surveying the shadows with a mocking smile. Charming. I see Father's little joke suits you perfectly. Her words sliced through me, but I held my ground. Claudia, I said quietly, you didn't have to come here. She laughed, tilting her head, her earrings catching the light. Of course I did. I needed to see what kind of pitiful existence you've chosen. A barn? Honestly, Mother, it's embarrassing. I bit back the ache in my chest. Once, she had been my little girl with braids and scraped knees, clinging to my hand. Now she stood before me like a stranger carved from cold marble. This is what your father left me, I replied, my voice steady, and I intend to honor it. Her eyes narrowed. Honor it? Don't make me laugh. You were always content with scraps, weren't you? Always letting Father make the decisions, always shrinking into the background. And now look at you, living in splinters while I take my rightful place. The venom in her tone made my stomach twist, but I refused to lower my gaze. Your rightful place? I asked softly. Is that what you call it? Throwing your mother out of her home? Her smile faltered for a moment, but then she straightened, her confidence snapping back like a whip. Don't try to guilt me. You're too weak to hold on to what matters. I deserve the villa. Father knew it, and deep down, so do you. Anger surged in me, hot and sharp. Richard had seen this in her, the hunger, the entitlement, and he had known it would one day consume her. The villa is just walls and land, I told her, but there are things in this world you can't take with greed. My voice wavered but held, each word heavier than the last. She laughed again, though her eyes flickered with something else, suspicion. You almost sound like you know something I don't, she said slowly, her gaze scanning the barn as though its shadows might betray me. My heart thudded. Did she sense what lay beneath her feet? Her eyes narrowed further. Perhaps Father left you more than he let on. I should have this place inspected. Who knows what you might be hiding? I kept my face still, though inside a storm raged. If she looked too closely, if she pushed too hard, the sanctuary Richard had left for me could crumble under her greed. There is nothing here for you, I said firmly. Go back to your villa, Claudia. Leave me to my barn. She smirked, stepping closer until we were only inches apart. Oh, I will. But don't think I won't keep my eye on you. You've never been good at keeping secrets, Mother. Her voice dripped with scorn, yet her eyes burned with curiosity. She turned on her heel, her heels striking the dirt floor with deliberate force. At the threshold, she paused. Enjoy your splinters, she called, over her shoulder. Then she was gone, her car disappearing down the road in a cloud of dust. I stood alone in the silence, my body trembling, the echo of her words pressing into me. She suspected something. She would not let me be. I leaned against the wall of the barn, clutching Richard's letter in my pocket as though it could shield me. Claudia's greed was more dangerous than I had realized, and now I knew she would not rest until she uncovered whatever she thought I was hiding. Before I tell you what came next, let me pause here. If you've ever faced someone who doubted your strength, someone who tried to strip you of dignity, you'll understand the fire that carried me through that encounter. If my story resonates with you, stay with me until the end, and if you feel moved, share it with others. Because stories like mine aren't just about betrayal, they're about finding the strength to stand tall when no one expects you to. As the last light of day slipped through the cracks in the barn, I whispered to myself, Richard, I will protect this. I will protect what you left me. And in that vow, I felt my spine straighten, my resolve harden. Claudia might have left with suspicion in her eyes, but I remained, ready to face whatever storm she planned to bring. My name is Nora Whitmore. I am 65 years old, a retired librarian who once believed her life would drift into quietness among shelves of stories. Instead, I was betrayed by my own daughter, Claudia, who inherited the villa in Napa Valley, called me an old burden, and threw me out. All I had left was the rundown barn that Richard, my late husband, left in his will. What she didn't know was that the barn held secrets, letters, a hidden chamber, and treasures carefully prepared for me, and it was one of Richard's letters that guided me away from the valley, along a winding road that led to a small cottage by the sea. The drive there was long, the landscape shifting from vineyards and rolling hills to rugged cliffs and the endless expanse of water. The cottage stood at the edge of it all, weathered but strong, with white shutters and a red door that looked as if it had been waiting for me. When I turned the key Richard had tucked into his letter, the lock clicked open without resistance, as though the house had known my hand would one day arrive. I stepped inside, and the air smelled faintly of salt and cedar, Richard's scent lingering as if he had only just left. The living room was simple but warm, filled with wooden furniture polished by time, a stone fireplace, and shelves lined with books I didn't recognize. On the mantel rested a photograph of Richard and me from decades ago, our younger selves smiling under the Napa sun. My breath caught. He had placed it here deliberately. This was not just a property, it was a sanctuary. As I walked through the cottage, I felt the heaviness of betrayal lift, replaced by a sense of belonging. The barn had been a vault hidden and secretive, but this was a home. Richard had given me not only wealth, but also a place where I could breathe, where Claudia's shadow could not reach me. For the first time since his passing, I felt safe. In the kitchen, I found another envelope tucked carefully inside a drawer. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a note written in Richard's familiar hand, shorter than the first, but no less powerful. "My love," it read, "this cottage is yours alone. It is registered in your name, beyond dispute. If Claudia comes after you, she cannot touch this place. Live here freely, heal, and when you are ready, there is someone you must meet." That someone arrived the next morning. A gentle knock sounded at the door, and when I opened it, I saw a man in his late 60s, tall and calm, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Whitmore?" he asked softly. "I'm Dr. Allen, Richard's physician. He asked me to give you something when the time was right." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small recorder. We sat by the fire as I pressed the play button. Richard's voice filled the room, deep and steady, and my heart nearly broke hearing it again. "Nora," he said, "if you are listening, then you found the cottage. Good." I feared what Claudia might do after I was gone. I feared she would try to consume you with her bitterness. But I wanted you to have a place where you could begin again. Promise me you will not let her take this from you. Promise me you will choose life. Tears streamed down my face as his voice faded. Dr. Allen placed a gentle hand on mine. "He spoke of you often," he said. "He worried for you, more than you realize. He wanted to be sure you had strength to carry on before I share more. Let me pause for just a moment. If you've ever been cast aside or made to feel small, then you know how vital it is to find a place where your worth cannot be questioned. For me, this cottage was that place. If my story resonates with you, I invite you to stay with me until the end. And if it touches you, share it with others. No one should face betrayal without knowing that healing is possible." That night, I stood on the porch, listening to the waves crash against the cliffs. The stars stretched wide above me, and the salty air wrapped around me like a blanket. I held Richard's letter and the recorder close to my chest, whispering my promise into the wind. "I will live, Richard. I will protect what you gave me." The villa was Claudia's prize, heavy with greed and arrogance. But here, in this little cottage by the sea, I had something greater, a place where love lingered, where healing could take root, and where I could begin again. My name is Nora Whitmore. I am 65 years old, a retired librarian who thought her later years would be spent in the comfort of the villa in Napa Valley. Instead, my daughter Claudia inherited the villa, called me an old burden, and threw me out. What she didn't know was that the rundown barn Richard left me held more than splinters. It held his letters, a hidden chamber, and treasures he had set aside to protect me. For a time, I thought I was safe within Richard's foresight, but Claudia's hunger was never satisfied, and the day came when she learned that my barn held more than she had ever imagined. It started with shadows at the edge of my days. I noticed footprints in the dirt near the barn that weren't mine, a faint impression of tires at odd hours, and once, when I came back from the cottage, I found the barn doors slightly ajar, though I knew I had locked them. Claudia had hired someone to watch me, to follow me, and it was only a matter of time before her suspicion grew into certainty. The barn she had dismissed as worthless now gnawed at her, and when her private investigator reported back to her, the storm finally broke. One evening, just as the last light slipped behind the hills, Claudia arrived. Her car's headlights swept across the barn, harsh and unforgiving. I stood in the doorway, my heart heavy, as she stepped out in heels too fine for gravel, her face tight with a determination that chilled me. "So, Mother," she said, her voice sharp as the wind, "I hear you've been hiding something. Something Father left for you." My breath caught, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Claudia, you shouldn't be here." "Oh, but I should," she spat, stepping closer. "Do you really think I wouldn't find out? Do you think you could sit here in your little pile of wood keeping secrets from me? I know about the cars, the safe, everything. That barn you love so much, it's not just rotting wood, is it?" Her words hit like blows, each syllable a confirmation of my worst fear. She knew. My mind raced. She could not have stumbled onto the truth alone. Someone had told her, someone I could not see. But there was no denying it. Claudia had glimpsed the wealth Richard had hidden. I steadied my voice, though my hands trembled at my sides. "This was never meant for you, Claudia. Your father trusted me with it." Her laugh rang hollow. "Trusted you?" "He pitied you, Mother. He knew you couldn't survive without something to cling to, but you've kept it from me, his rightful heir. Do you think you can stand between me and what's mine?" The fury in her face frightened me, but behind it I saw something else, a desperation, a hunger that could never be filled. "It isn't yours," I said softly. "The villa is what he gave you. This is mine." She stepped closer until we were almost touching. "Don't test me, Mother. I will have what you're hiding. I'll take you to court if I must. I'll drag you through the mud until you have nothing left." Her words trembled at the edges, not with doubt, but with rage. I drew in a breath, pressing Richard's last letter to my chest beneath my coat, his words giving me strength. "If you try," I whispered, "you'll only lose more than you know." Claudia recoiled, her eyes narrowing, suspicion mingling with anger. "What do you mean by that?" she demanded. I didn't answer. Silence was my weapon now, the only shield I had left. She hated silence. It forced her to see the cracks in her own certainty. For a moment we stood in the dim barn, the weight of Richard's secrets pressing between us. Then, with a sharp turn, she stormed out, her heels striking the ground like gunshots. "This isn't over," she threw over her shoulder. "You'll regret crossing me." I watched her car vanish down the road, dust rising in the wake of her fury. My knees weakened, but I forced myself to stay upright. Claudia's greed had led her straight to the heart of what Richard left me, and now I knew she would stop at nothing to take it. The storm was no longer just suspicion, it was war. Before I tell you what came next, let me pause here. If you've ever been threatened by someone you love, If you've stood face to face with their betrayal, you know the chill that settles in your bones. But you also know the fire that rises in your chest when you refuse to break. If my story speaks to you, stay with me. And if it moves you, share it with others. Because no one should ever face a battle for dignity alone. That night, I sat in the barn long after Claudia had gone, my hands resting on Richard's journals, my heart heavy with the knowledge of what lay ahead. Claudia would take me to court. She would try to strip me of everything, but I would not yield. Richard had trusted me, and I would honor that trust, no matter how fierce the storm became. My name is Nora Whitmore. I am 65 years old, a retired librarian who once thought my later years would be defined by the warmth of family. Instead, my daughter Claudia inherited the villa in Napa Valley, called me an old burden, and forced me into exile with nothing but a run-down barn. She laughed at my disgrace, unaware that inside that barn, Richard had hidden his greatest secrets, letters, treasures, and proof of his love. When she finally discovered there was more to my inheritance than she imagined, she came after me with everything she had, and so we met not in the quiet of the barn or the halls of the villa, but in the solemn weight of a courtroom. The morning of the hearing, I stood outside the courthouse, clutching the sleeve of my coat as the wind cut across the stone steps. Claudia emerged from a sleek black car, dressed in designer gray, her expression sculpted into confidence. She didn't look at me as she passed, her heels striking the pavement like a declaration. Her lawyer trailed behind her, carrying files as if they were weapons. For a moment I felt small, but then I remembered Richard's letters, his voice recorded in the device Dr. Allen had given me, and Patricia Doyle at my side, the attorney Richard had quietly arranged for me. Patricia was sharp-eyed and steady, her presence anchoring me as we walked inside. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and faint paper dust. The judge, a stern man with silver hair, presided from his bench. I took my seat, my hands folded in my lap, while Claudia sat opposite me, her smile thin and triumphant. She glanced at me once, and in her eyes I saw not just arrogance, but hunger. The same hunger that had driven her to cast me aside. Her attorney spoke first, his voice smooth, his words like carefully sharpened blades. He painted a picture of Claudia as the rightful heir, claiming I had hidden assets meant for the family estate. The barn, he argued, was a decoy. Mrs. Whitmore has concealed vehicles, investments, and accounts that should be returned to my client. Claudia nodded along, her chin high, her gaze locked on the judge as though daring him to disagree. Patricia rose with quiet dignity. She adjusted her glasses, her voice calm but edged with steel. "Your Honor," she began, "the barn was not a decoy. It was a deliberate inheritance left solely to Mrs. Whitmore. The villa was left to Miss Claudia Whitmore. That division was clear. What my client has discovered within her barn is not deception. It is exactly what her late husband intended her to have." The air in the room thickened. Claudia leaned forward, her face flushed. "He never loved you as much as he loved me," she snapped across the aisle, forgetting herself. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The judge's gavel struck, calling for silence, but the damage was done. Claudia's mask of control cracked, and for the first time, her desperation showed. Patricia waited for quiet before continuing. "We have proof," she said, sliding a small device across the table. The judge gestured for it to be played. A soft click filled the room, and then Richard's voice echoed through the chamber, deep and steady. "My dearest Nora," the recording began, "if you are hearing this, then my fears were true. I left Claudia the villa knowing her heart would be tested, but I entrusted the barn to you because within it lies the legacy I built for us. It belongs to you, Nora. Use it as you see fit. Do not let anyone, Claudia least of all, take it from you." The courtroom fell silent, Richard's words carrying a weight that could not be denied. My eyes burned with tears as I listened, not just to his instructions, but to the love in his tone. Patricia lifted her gaze to the judge. This message, recorded and notarized by Dr. Allen, confirms Mr. Whitmore's intention beyond dispute. My client's inheritance is valid, protected, and cannot be claimed by the plaintiff. The judge's expression softened, though his authority never wavered. The evidence is clear, he declared. The barn and everything contained within it belongs solely to Mrs. Nora Whitmore. This case is dismissed. Claudia gasped, her face crumpling in disbelief. "No!" she cried, rising to her feet. "This isn't fair. He loved me. He loved me more than her." Her voice broke, shrill and raw, echoing off the walls. The judge banged his gavel again, but she no longer cared for decorum. She turned to me, her eyes brimming with fury and tears. "You've stolen everything from me, Mother." Everything. I sat still, my hands clasped together, my heart aching at the sight of her unraveling. This was not victory. It was heartbreak wrapped in justice. Before I take you to what happened after the gavel fell, let me pause here. If you've ever had to fight for your dignity, if you've ever had someone try to strip away what was rightfully yours, you understand the weight of that courtroom. If my story speaks to you, stay with me until the end. And if it touches you, share it with someone who needs to hear that justice can come even in silence. As Claudia stormed out, her lawyer struggling to follow, Patricia placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You did well," she said. I nodded, though my heart was heavy. The law had spoken. Richard's voice had defended me even from beyond the grave. But the rift between my daughter and me had only deepened. And as I stepped outside into the sharp autumn air, I whispered to Richard's memory, "We won." But at what cost? My name is Nora Whitmore. I am 65 years old, a retired librarian who once imagined her final years would be spent in the quiet comfort of family. Instead, my daughter Claudia inherited the villa in Napa Valley, looked me in the eyes, and called me an old burden. She cast me out with nothing but a run-down barn, mocking me as she took possession of the vineyards and marble halls. What she never knew was that the barn held Richard's hidden legacy, treasures he entrusted to me alone. I defended that legacy in court, where Richard's voice cleared all doubt and the judge ruled in my favor. But what came after was not triumph. It was the breaking of my daughter's pride and the moment that revealed the little girl she had once been. The courthouse emptied slowly that day, but Claudia lingered behind, pacing in the hallway with fury and despair written across her face. When I emerged, Patricia Doyle by my side, Claudia turned sharply. Her eyes were red from tears she refused to shed in front of the judge. "You think you've won, don't you?" she hissed, her voice trembling. "But all you've done is humiliate me." Her words struck me harder than I expected. For so long she had been the child I wanted to protect, even as she hurled cruelty at me. Now, stripped of her arrogance, she looked small, angry, yes, but also lost. She pushed past me, her shoulder hard against mine, and stormed into the parking lot. For a moment, I wanted to let her go, to leave her in her fury. But something in my chest ached, a reminder that no matter how sharp her betrayal, she was still my daughter. Later that evening, back at the barn, I found her again. She had come unannounced, her car parked crooked in the drive, her figure slumped on the steps as though the weight of the world pressed down on her. The anger in her face was gone, replaced by something rawer: grief, confusion, desperation. When I approached, she didn't look up, only whispered, "Why did he choose you? Why not me?" I sat beside her in the fading light. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, heavy but fragile. Finally, Claudia lifted her hands to her face, and that was when I saw it. The delicate scarf she clutched, frayed at the edges, a scarf I had once wrapped around her shoulders on her first day of school. She had kept it all these years. My throat tightened. She pressed the fabric to her eyes, her shoulders shaking. "I hate you," she choked, "because I wanted him to see me. I wanted him to trust me like he trusted you, but he never did." Her sobs broke free then, jagged and unrestrained, echoing in the quiet air. My heart clenched, torn between sorrow and anger, love and disappointment. I placed my hand gently on her back. "Claudia," I whispered, "your father saw you. He wanted to believe in you, but he also saw the hunger in your heart, and he feared it would consume you. That's why he left you the villa, not as punishment, but as a test. And this," I gestured toward the barn behind us, "this was his way of protecting me." She looked at me then, her face streaked with tears, her eyes wide and vulnerable, no longer the woman who had stood in court, but the child I had once rocked to sleep. "I don't know how to stop," she admitted. "I don't know how to be anything but this." Her words broke me more than her cruelty ever had. I pulled her into my arms, and though she resisted at first, eventually she collapsed against me, trembling like the little girl who used to cry when storms shook the windows. I held her close, pressing my cheek to her hair. "Then start here," I murmured. "Start with honesty. Start with admitting what you've lost and what you still have. Before I tell you how that night ended, let me pause. If you've ever loved someone who hurt you, if you've ever carried both rage and tenderness in the same heart, then you know how heavy that moment was. Betrayal doesn't erase love, and love doesn't erase pain. If my story resonates with you, I invite you to stay with me until the end, and if it touches you, share it, so others who carry the weight of fractured families might know they are not alone." Claudia wept until her sobs quieted into silence. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were swollen, her voice small. Do you forgive me?" she asked. I looked at her, and the truth pressed hard against my lips. "I forgive you for being human," I said softly, "but forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. If you want my help, if you want to heal, you must change. You must learn to carry love instead of hunger." Lowered her gaze, clutching the old scarf as though it were the last tether to something pure. For the first time, I saw not the woman who had mocked me, but the daughter who might still find redemption. That night, beneath the fading sky, mother and daughter sat side by side on the steps of the barn, wrapped in the fragile thread of possibility. It was not peace, not yet, but it was a beginning. My name is Nora Whitmore. I am 65 years old, a retired librarian who was once thrown out of the villa in Napa Valley by my own daughter, Claudia. She called me an old burden, claimed the marble halls and vineyards for herself, and left me with nothing but a run-down barn. What she didn't know was that the barn was never empty. It held Richard's letters, his hidden treasures, and the proof of his love. It became the place where I was broken and remade. And as I sit here now, driving along the coast in one of Richard's vintage cars, I know my story no longer belongs to exile. It belongs to rebirth. The sun dipped low across the ocean, casting ribbons of gold across the water. The engine purred beneath my hands as the wind tangled my silver hair. In the passenger seat beside me, folded carefully, was Richard's last letter, the one he left to remind me that I was never forgotten, never weak, never alone. I touched the envelope gently, feeling its weight not as paper, but as a promise. Life had shifted in ways I never could have imagined. The barn was no longer just a place of shame. It had become a vault of strength. The cottage by the sea had become my refuge, a place where I could breathe freely, safe from Claudia's hunger. And now, with Richard's foresight and Patricia's guidance, I had begun something new, a foundation for women like me, women cast aside in silence, women told they were too old or too weak to start again. I called it the Whitmore Trust, not as a monument to Richard or even to myself, but as a beacon for those who needed to remember that beginnings can come even at the edge of loss. Still, the ache of Claudia lingered. I thought of her often, of the night she wept with my scarf clutched in her hands, the little girl buried inside her grief. I did not know if she would ever change, if she would ever find the courage to lay down her pride. But I had made peace with the truth. Her journey was hers, and mine was mine. Love did not mean surrender. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting. And sometimes, the strongest act of love is drawing a line and choosing to live anyway. Before I share my last thoughts, let me pause here. If you have ever been betrayed, if you've ever been pushed out of the very home you built with your hands and heart, you know the hollow pain that settles in your bones. But you also know this: we are never too old to begin again. If my story stirs something inside you, I hope you'll stay with me to the end. And if it speaks to you, share it. Because someone out there needs to hear that. Their life is not over, no matter what has been taken from them. The road curved along the cliffs, the sea crashing below. I pressed the accelerator gently, the car gliding forward with a freedom I hadn't felt in years. The horizon stretched wide, open, waiting. I thought of Richard, of his careful plans, his quiet love hidden in dusty barns and seaside cottages. He had not only left me wealth, he had left me faith in myself. His final gift was not money or property, but the strength to rise when I had been cast down. When I reached the cottage, the night sky had bloomed with stars. I parked the car, stepped out, and stood on the porch, the sea air filling my lungs. Inside, the fireplace glowed, casting warmth across the wooden floors. I laid Richard's letter on the mantel, beside the photograph of us from years ago. For a long moment, I simply stood there, the silence wrapping around me, steady and unbroken. I whispered into the stillness, "Richard, I kept my promise. I chose life, and I will keep choosing it every day." The barn key hung now from a chain around my neck, no longer a symbol of exile, but of strength. To others, it might look like nothing more than rusted metal. To me, it was the door to everything I had found, everything I had become. It was the reminder that even when I was cast out, I was never truly empty-handed. And so I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and let the waves carry my vow into the night. I was Nora Whitmore, 65 years old, once betrayed, now reborn. My story was no longer one of loss. It was a testament that even in the quietest corners of ruin, life can begin again,